right. And just so y'all know, if you want to put in your LinkedIn URL in the chat or a company website, feel free to do so. We share this out afterwards, and we do post it to the CTW blog as well. I'll pass it to you, John Healy.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. Mark Connaught, I think you had an opportunity to spend some time with the folks in India again last week. And for those of you who are regulars on the call, you may remember, I think we're about maybe 6 weeks ago at this point that we had a team come in from India to talk about how the platform marketplaces are really emerging into the country, how it's shifting the way labor is engaged. Mark had a chance to spend some of the time with the folks who were on the line and presented to us, but also to spend some time in country where he lives and get perspective. So I thought there was maybe an update you could share for us.
Sure, I'd be delighted to. Some of you will remember that we had Dr. Sakshi Khurana, who came and talked about the report, which she was the lead author on, published by Niti Aayog, which is the Indian government sort of think tank. And they convened a conference last Friday and very kindly invited me along to talk on a panel about the sort of education and skills dimension of that. There's a lot of interest around the concept of CTW. I had lots of people come up to me afterwards and ask, what was CTW? What did we have in terms of resources on the ground in India? And I've extended invitations to several people. There are a couple of takeaways that I thought it was worth sharing. The first of which is that the Indian government is clearly taking the gig and platform economy seriously and thinking quite significantly about what guardrails should be put in place and, you know, the way in which that should be regulated, which I think is very encouraging. And secondly, I think there's an interesting dimension to this, which is that gig and platform work in India brings people from the informal into the formal economies. And I think that that's perhaps different in many ways to what we've seen happen in the West, where in some instances, some of the critique perhaps of gig and platform work is that it's taking away formality and moving people into informal work. Whereas what you see in India is that channel, and it enables people to move from the more informal into the formal. And clearly that's something which the government wants to promote. And so I think there's some interesting work happening in India. You know, perhaps historically, the approach was to say, well, you know, what can we learn from the West and how can we adopt things that have been done and developed in more developed markets? And I think increasingly the stuff that's happening in India, Niti Aayog is a good example of that, where, you know, the rest of us could learn from some of the things that are happening at pace and at scale in India.
Thanks, Mark. And I think there's some really neat things. I know that Barry Matthews and the OA team have been in touch with the government of Kerala, who are really looking at the platform economy as a way to keep some of the talent native to their state, as opposed to having them all rush off to the tech hubs. And we see that as a growing area for different governments around the world. So always a point of interest. So again, if any of you either are attending events in advance that are important to this community and we should be aware of, or if you have some research that you're publishing, please make sure to let us know so that we can give you an opportunity to share some things there. Balaji, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, Mark, you know, there's been a lot of noise in the system with Wipro, Infosys, and everybody putting a kibosh on moonlighting. And that's kind of like brought up the concept of, you know, employees and what they do with their own time after the 9 hours that they are working. Have we seen any response from, what does the government think about it? Who do they own the 24 hours of the employee's time, or what can the employees do and cannot do beyond their own work? And what is the implication to Indian workforce, which is probably the biggest workforce in freelancing in the world?
Yeah, good question. I think there are two parts to the answer. One of which is that we've done an interesting piece of work recently with a company called Tech Mahindra, which some of you will know as one of the sort of large outsourcing providers. they are very much into the concept of moonlighting and have developed for themselves a platform which allows them to do things, you know, in a sense, in the way that Wipro is able to do through Topcoder, although it's sort of come out recently and said that we don't want people to be working for other companies. So I think there's some interesting movement there where, you know, certainly Tech Mahindra seems to have put its arms around the idea of the gig and platform economy and wanting to be more actively participating in that. And secondly, in terms of your question about the government has now recognized gig and platform work as a legitimate category of work. Now, and I mean, that's a recent development. So again, it feels to me like, you know, there's a level of formality that's being introduced there on the part of the government to give credibility and credence to, you know, people who choose to work in the freelance economy. And Barry and I talked yesterday very briefly, and I used this example, which was that, you know, 2 decades ago, if you talked about yourself as an entrepreneur in India, that would have been looked down upon, right? Because, you know, entrepreneur was a kind of a fudge for doesn't really have a proper job, you know, probably working freelance. Now everybody wants to call themselves an entrepreneur. And so I don't think it's unrealistic to think that in another, you know, in a generation over the next couple of decades, that same sort of credibility can attach itself to people who choose to work as freelancers.
Yeah.
I hope that
Balaji,
to some
I
degree
can-
I've been able to answer the question, Balaji.
Yeah, I can add a little bit of color to it, having had conversation with the Minister of Labor in India, in that the 24 hours are owned by the employer, is the way that it's structured today. And legally, you are to get a waiver from your employer to have a second job. And so that's the cultural norm that's there, but it's a real struggle for a lot of organizations. And so there is a sense that it'll become a competitive differentiator for organizations who choose to allow and not allow as you go through it, but it is definitely a point of contention in the market right now.
John, from your point of view, is that a cultural norm or is that a legal rule?
There is a legal context built on a cultural norm, and the cultural norm says that, and the basis for it was that at the end of an 8-hour day, your time should be devoted to your family. And if you're not giving your time to your family properly, then you are not able to work effectively for your employer. And so it was really about ensuring people maintained a work-life balance is the legal justification behind the positioning. But there are now open questions as there are government schemes to start collecting taxes on that informal workforce as they become part of the gig marketplace, to say, is this law outdated? Now, the timing of that getting updated, that's a whole nother story. But yes, there is a legal background to it.
Do we know, this is Sheila from Lifestyle Hub, do we know when that law was actually implemented? Just out of curiosity, how old is it?
Probably 50 plus years.
Probably more than 75. It's probably a hangover from the British Raj.
Yeah. Yeah, long-standing, one of those small print written in the middle of a big chapter that some now are saying, I'm going to take advantage of that to control because I'm worried about it. So if other people have experience or are running into it, certainly let us know. We welcome that along the way. I see Karen's comment of kind of the old Christian vestige about Sundays being, you know, a day of rest. It probably culturally dates back to that.
Yeah.
All right. I think we had talked as a group. Gloat Live was a pretty cool event that was going on. Had some wonderful speakers overlapped with us. So we all went back and saw our recordings and saw some good stuff. And we're fortunate enough to have Jeff Schwartz join us today to share a little bit about the research that they've been doing. And the conversations that took place during Gloat Live. So Jeff, I'm going to turn the floor over.
Great, thank you. Let me, I'm going to try to share some slides, which I will then get to the team here. And let's see if I have it right. I never get it right away. Sorry. You can see the slides now, right?
We're good.
Perfect. Okay, so very briefly, I'm Jeff Schwartz. I've been on many of these calls in the last couple of years. I have a couple of roles, mainly a vice president. I have this wonderful role that the CEO Ben and I came up with called the Vice President of Insights and Impact. I also teach at Columbia Business School a course on strategy and leadership in the future of work. And I've written a couple of books, and we have one coming out on workforce ecosystems early next year with MIT Press that I know that we've talked about on some other calls as well, and have been sort of researching talent marketplace and workforce ecosystems for some time. Very quickly, and again, as I said, we'll share this with you. One of the things that I do each month, actually 11 times a year, we do a combined November-December report, is I put out a research roundup report. I think we've done 10 so far this year. Again, we'll send this to you. There's a link here. And what I'm trying to do is sort of listen and read what's going on out there that's broadly related to talent markets and workforce intelligence and talent markets. And I capture that in this in these research roundups. It's a pretty interesting collection because it's pretty broad. It's not an HR piece. It's not a people analytics piece. It's not just on platforms. It's sort of broadly on anything that I think is sort of touching on what's going on in talent marketplaces. We had an amazing conference this year. It exceeded our expectations when we did Gloat Live. I think hopefully many of you know what Gloat is. We're a 7-year-old startup. We raised about $182 million. We see ourselves as the pioneers in talent and career marketplaces and analytics and workforce intelligence based on that. We have an amazing set of leading clients, mainly large companies, but increasingly mid-sized companies around the world. I'll mention a couple of them in a few minutes. And this year when we did Gloat Live, we did something a little bit new. We didn't do a wholly virtual conference. We had about 100 people, mainly clients, at a meeting in Fort Lauderdale. And then we broadcast to about 2,000 people around the world, and that hybrid environment worked really well. We were very fortunate to have some great speakers. All of this was not only live streamed, it's also recorded. You can just go to the Gloat website and find them. I think there's some amazing pieces there. Josh Bersin spoke. Al Gore spoke on the sustainable workforce and its relationship to the climate, which was amazing. We had 4 CHROs speak, CHROs from Seagate, MetLife, Goldman Sachs, and MasterCard. And then the other discussions were companies that are implementing talent marketplaces and what their experiences are. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. So when I was thinking about what we learned in 2022 and what we're thinking about in terms of 2023, this is my reflections in one page. I'm just going to read through it, and then I'm going to try to highlight some of the points. And again, I'll share the slides with you. The first is that employee expectations have changed, but this is not the Great Resignation. This is the Great Reassessment. Now, the Great Reassessment was a phrase coined by Heather Long, a Washington Post journalist, in May of 2021. And people keep trying to sort of recast it. Is it the Great Resignation? Is it quiet quitting? Is it job cuffing? That's the latest one I heard, which is that people sort of settle into their jobs between November and March because it's winter, and then they pop up again and look for new jobs in the spring. I think I was just interviewed on this week. I think all of that is basically misses the point. One of the things I think we've learned in 2022, and I think it's going to continue, is that there has been a reassessment and a realignment of employee expectations around flexibility, around values, around the kind of work that they do. And companies need to get that as sort of fundamental to the way that they organize. The second is, and I'll talk about this in a second, it's not just about skills. There's been a big buzz in 2022 about skills-based organizations. We think it's not just about skills, but it's also about understanding interests and aspirations. Human potential is not past skills. Human potential is what people want to and can do. And we think that's a big part of it. Another is a topic that I think we've all been thinking about in 2023, which is how jobs have been redefined. It's not only about jobs, it's about how jobs are both being fragmented and pixelated, good word for you, Balaji, and also how they're being broadened into projects. And I think that's something that really came on well with the work that in the book Work Without Jobs, and some of the work that Sue Cantrell did at Deloitte. I think that, you know, there's a lot of buzz around talent marketplaces. I've been to a lot of the HR and other conferences this year, HR Tech in Las Vegas, Unleashed World in Paris. You know, one of the things that I think we've learned, and I think Josh Berson's put it very well, is that talent markets are not simply adding a feature and a function and a database to whatever your offering is, which a lot of people have tried to do, I would say with remarkable lack of success. You know, this is not really a commercial for Gloat, but, and I'm going to highlight one point here. This is point 5, what a difference a year makes. And I'm going to highlight 2 examples of companies who implemented in late 2021 and had amazing business results in 2022, which is an unusual it's unusual to see large companies implement a new technology that has adoption and impact as quickly as we've seen with some of the talent marketplaces work. The last one, really number 6, number 7, is sort of something I'm going to talk about at the very end, but is that, and this reminded me, I was reminded of this when we had a brief discussion around the time of Gloat Live. And some people said, well, you know, this is about internal markets. We're looking at platforms. We have recruiting. And I think one of the things that we're going to see in 2023, it's something that we're looking at very hard at Gloat, is that internal markets, recruiting markets, and I think platforms like the ones that we're talking about at CTW are more connected than we thought. And I think they're going to be very connected as they're being implemented in organizations. So that's, you know, if you only get one page, that's sort of it. That's sort of what we've learned. We issued 2 major reports, really substantial reports in the last year. One was at the very end of the last year. We really wanted to get behind the headlines of what was called the Great Resignation. And what we found, again, all these reports are on the Gloat website, is that, you know, it's very interesting. This first highlighted point, 66, 2/3 of the people we surveyed in a survey in the US told us that they thought that there were better opportunities to grow outside their company than inside their company. That is a dramatic market failure for labor markets, that people think they should look outside. In fact, it was more interesting was that the more highly skilled you think you are, doesn't matter how highly skilled you are, but the more highly skilled you think you are, you even think you have a higher percentage of better opportunities outside the company. So the people that we probably most want to stay, most think they have better opportunities outside the organization. And more than half the people said, you know what, we don't think our employers are taking our future interests into account. And, you know, 6 out of 10 people said, look, we really want our work to align with our values. We did a follow-up survey in June, about 7 months later. And the good news, there's no good news. This was in June. June was really heavy recession thinking in the United States. I wanted to go back. I didn't get a chance to do it this morning and look at what the price of gas was in June. I think in June it was like $4.50, $5. Now it's about $3 in the US. It was a very bad time in terms of the consumer economy. And basically all the research that we did from the employee side was the same or worse in June. Employees continued to tell us that they were looking for other jobs. They were looking for jobs outside their organization, and they did not think that their interests were being held into account. We then also interviewed HR and talent leaders, and I'll talk to you about what they said in a second. Again, one of the big buzz themes of this year is the skills-based organization. My colleagues at Deloitte have put out some really great thinking on this. David Green, who runs a think tank team out of London, has sort of doubled down on this, as has people like Josh Bersin. the points that we're trying to highlight here, one of the things that I think we learned this year, or at least at Gloat we learned, is that the future is not about skills. It's about skills and aspirations. It's about skills and interest. It's about potential, right? And I think there's a little bit of a risk as we're moving in, from the job into a view of everything being around skills, that we're sort of missing that. And these are the three basic questions that we ask at Gloat, which is we're going to understand what the skills are of people that are in our talent market platform, but we also want to know what skills they want to gain, and we want to know where they want to take their career. And it's the combination of these three questions that produce the most value for the individual and the company. So I think there's going to be a challenge in 2023 and beyond as to how we're implementing skills-based strategies, and are we actually looking at skills and potential and interests. One of the ways that we look at it at, again, at Gloat, and this is something that is sort of very interesting because it's something there's a lot of interest in the market, particularly from companies that tell us. I was talking to a company in the last week who said, look, 50% of our high potentials leave because they can't find career options in our company, right? So the people that we most want to stay are looking for somewhere else. And then one of the things we ask is, well, can they find different career paths in your organization? And people scratch their head and say, well, what do you mean? Well, in most organizations, there's only one career path. You join a department and you progress in that department in a linear way. It may sound funny, it may sound outdated, but most career planning models are very much linear and ladder models. What we're asking are 4 questions at the same time. We think these are the questions. 3 questions are the questions that individuals ask. 1 question is a question we think the company wants to know. One is, you want to know every day, what are the next steps in your career in the group that you're in? You also want to know, hey, I decided that I don't want to be in finance anymore. I want to be in procurement, focusing on sustainability. I want to do a 180. I want to go in another direction. We're calling this the desired career path. What are the actual career opportunities in your organization? Excuse me, there are either roles or projects that you can undertake. And then what can you do? How do you actually move into them based on your experience and your skills? There's what we call a managerial path. People say, you know what? I don't really care what division of the company I'm in. I want to manage people. I want to manage a team. I want to move into a divisional management role, whether I'm 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, it doesn't really matter. And we will then give you an idea of how you can move into those roles. Then the 4th one is interesting because this is the one that recruiting is most focused on. We call it the promoted path. I would like to know in my company, what are the hot jobs and the hot roles in the organization? And how can I develop myself to move into that area, either through a project or a mentoring experience or a learning track, so that if the company says, look, we need more data scientists, we need more people focusing on certain kinds of supply chain activities, that I can figure out relative to what I have done in the company and my broad experience, how I can do that. Again, it's much broader than the linear career paths. And then I mentioned a second ago, in the research that we did over the summer, we interviewed and we surveyed, I think, about 400 HR and talent executives to figure out, how good are you at this skills-based organization thing? Actually, Deloitte's done a very similar study, a more robust study on this. That's fantastic. And basically, what we found is that people say that skills information is important, but HR managers say, you know what, we really don't have that information, right? And employees say, you know what, we can't even find these upskilling and reskilling programs in our company. And then HR managers say, this is a euphemism in business. Half of HR managers we surveyed said that their skills management inventory is a work in progress. A work in progress is a kind way of saying we need to be doing something, but we don't nearly have what we need around skills. So everyone is trying to figure out how to do it. And yet 1 out of 5 employees say, you know what, my current role barely uses any of my skills, right? So where are those people going to go? Employees are telling us, and HR managers are telling us that they're not using. 54% of employees say that their current role doesn't make good use of their skills. And half of HR managers say they're struggling to meet their recruitment targets. This is one of my favorites. Job information is out of date. The idea that people are going to write job architectures is sort of a crazy idea. Basically, half of people tell us that their job architecture is out of date, and half of employees say, you know what, I don't really have a relevant job description for what I'm doing. So why we're trying to keep doing that in a manual way is an interesting question. And then finally, we're seeing skill challenges existing at every level. Quarter of employees say they don't even know what skills are required to progress or be promoted in their organization. So how are we going to operate a skills-based organization? And HR managers say, look, we just don't have the workforce data and the bandwidth to get what we need. So there's a lot of work to be done in 2023 if we're thinking about where we're actually going. I'm just going to mention these 2 points because I think they're familiar and others have talked about them. I think in 2022, it became very evident that the job as the main unit of analysis has sort of become outdated. And again, both the work from Ravan and John Boudreau and Ravan Jasuthis, and then Sue Cantrell at Deloitte, I think, bring this out. I really like the way that Sue summarizes this, which is jobs are being pulled in 2 different directions. Work is both being pixelated and fragmented. That creates the opportunity to do it in many different ways, but it's also becoming more project-based, right? And so it's not that work is only going one direction, it's going in 2 directions, and we're trying to figure out how to actually apply that. At Gloat, we sort of are very focused on this issue, and our sort of observation is that we cannot manage the future of the workforce if we're going to do it in the same boxes in the linear models that we had before. I'm trying not to mainly talk about Gloat. I'm trying to talk about what we've learned in the industry. I want to make a couple of points about what we have seen in the last year from a couple of Gloat clients. And again, all the companies that we work with, as all the companies that all of us work with, are going through the same economic conditions, the economic turbulence we've done a lot of work with some very large companies around the world. The biggest ones that we worked with in the last few years are Schneider Electric, Unilever, HSBC. But I want to emphasize the last 2 on this slide. I want to very briefly talk about what we've done with MasterCard, what MasterCard and Novartis have done, not what we've done, what MasterCard and Novartis have done. Both these companies, these are large companies, started implementing in the second part of 2021. And this was what's so interesting to me, is that these are the results that they've achieved within the first year, in the case of Novartis, within the first 6 months of implementing an internal talent marketplace. Novartis's focus was looking at this from a skills-based organization perspective. They rolled it out. To them, what was very important is that a very high percentage of what they were doing was cross-country, cross-geography, and cross-functional. That was a major initiative within what they were doing with their talent market, which is to free talent from to move across geographic boundaries and functional boundaries in the organization. And they did something very interesting. They had their finance department. I don't want to use the word audit. I see Balaji on the screen, and I know we all know a lot of auditors, but they literally had their finance group review the numbers on their business case. And they reported that in 2 months, they broke even, and in 6 months, they estimated they generated about $2 million in value that actually paid for the program. And they've unlocked about 50,000 hours, and unlocked hours, the measure here is hours from your employees who were working on projects that if they weren't working on them, you would probably need to hire an external organization to do the work of some sort. And they put a value on that. We don't put a value on it. They put a value, they calculate the hours, and then they put a value on the project. Very similar, but even more dramatic story at MasterCard. They implemented a pilot at the end of 2021, a major rollout in 2022. Actually, just had Heather Yurko, who's the VP of Digital Talent, speaking with my class at Columbia. Fascinating story at MasterCard. And the numbers are even more dramatic. 71% of their 24,000 people across the world are using it. They estimate about $21 million in savings, 700,000 hours of unlocked hours. And again, reduced recruitment costs, but 70% of the work was cross-functional, 58% increase in women taking on certain kinds of roles. The point I want to emphasize here is that this is happening within 1 year, right? And this is sort of again, we're excited about it. It was sort of our hypothesis that we can implement a platform and a new way of working. And within the year that it's implemented, achieve results that in the case of the CFO looking at it, they can actually measure it and see the impact. That's something we learned this year. We learned that because some of our earlier clients, we were involved in multi-year rollouts that were accelerated by COVID. Then we had a number of major companies, MasterCard and Novartis to do examples where they really accelerated it coming out of, in the second year. Hopefully we can go at the end of the COVID era, but we can have a separate discussion on where we are in that. What I want to do now is I want to make two final points, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. I think over the last year, we are getting a better idea, or at least I think I'm getting a better idea in the work I'm doing with people at Gloat and also at Columbia Business School, and our colleagues who we've worked with at Deloitte and MIT Sloan Management Review, as to how the talent marketplace is evolving and where I think it's going, and how we're going to see internal talent markets and employment, and hiring, and hopefully workforce ecosystems and platforms come together. So this is a very, very quick, like a 5-minute summary of like the history and evolution of talent markets. We started by looking at the talent marketplace question, and in most organizations, this is what career paths looked like. You joined a department and your trajectory was up in a vertical way. You went from being a finance analyst to a finance manager, finance director, head of finance. And you did that in each of your departments, and you were siloed. And that was our view of career markets. When we started an internal marketplace, one of the things we said was, you know what, today, anybody can go anywhere, right? So we took down those vertical boundaries between the departments and said you can go anywhere. And in order to do that, we had to actually implement another way of looking at it. We weren't just putting people into jobs and work. We were also, as we talked about earlier, we looked at how work was being pulled in two directions. We looked at projects, we looked at tasks, we looked at skills, we looked at aspirations. And when we put that together, that created the talent marketplace. We call this, some of my colleagues at Gloat call this the hard problem. The hard problem is actually the psychological problem of like, how does the physical brain create consciousness? Tom Starford wrote a play on that. That's a whole other discussion. But we started with the hard problem for us was how to create internal talent and career markets, and to use a platform, and literally a marketplace platform using AI to do that. And in the couple of examples I've just given you, we've got dozens of examples of large companies who've created these internal marketplaces. What we're looking at right now, what we introduced actually at the Gloat Live conference, is it's not a recruitment solution. It's extending the talent marketplace from current employees to future employees. And literally what we're doing is, in the recruitment process, we are giving potential future employees, candidates, a similar experience to see the range of career opportunities and project opportunities within the organization that they are joining, right? So when you imagine you go to the recruitment page at Deloitte, Apology, and you're interested in a particular job, and then you put in the same kind of information, some basic information that you would put into an internal talent marketplace. It says, great, Apology, look at, you've applied for this job in the strategy practice, but here are 4 other jobs, and then here are some projects that we're doing that you might be able to join on a project team. Or here's a mentor that you might get even before you've joined the organization to become connected to us. So it's not a recruitment tool, it's literally extending the talent market to people that are potentially going to be your future employees. And of course, as you would expect, hopefully see, our vision, and this is what we're thinking about in 2023, is that the same talent marketplace that an organization has enables them to create development and deployment and internal mobility opportunities within their organization for their current employees, for their future employees, and then to extend it and integrate it with ecosystem platforms as well. One way that we look at this, we've all heard these expressions for a very long time: build, buy, and borrow. What we're imagining now is a set of an integrated platform that allows business and project leaders and managers to think about how do they build their current workforce. That's the internal talent marketplace. How do they buy new talent? How do they bring new talent into the talent marketplace? And how do they borrow talent in the ecosystem through one integrated platform? And some of our clients, Novartis is probably the best example. This is very much the vision of the leaders at Novartis, which is they would like to be able to create, I don't think they use exactly the expression build, buy, borrow, but one place that you can access and manage any kind of workforce that you are looking at in your organization. And then how, of course, do you tie that into a workforce intelligence platform? Because one of the things that we've learned, and I'll mention two other things very briefly, and then we'll open it for questions. One of the things we've learned very much in 2022 and 2021, we're expecting to see continue, is that by creating talent markets at the companies that we've been working with, these markets produce incredibly rich and value information, much richer and more valuable than the information we get from traditional HR and talent databases. So if we have marketplaces that have the interactions for our current employees, our future employees, and the ecosystem talent we're working with, it produces an entirely new set of data and analytics that we have before. These are the 7 things that we talked about. I'm just going to come back to the last one. For some of you who may have heard me talk about these topics over the last couple of years, this was the whole thesis of the book that I wrote on Work Disrupted. The problem, I used to say the problem is, and I'm saying the problem remains, that we are still trying to navigate 21st century work and careers with 20th century maps. This whole discussion of the last few minutes about talent marketplaces for our employees, future employees, and the workforce ecosystem is a very different reframing of the question. It's very difficult right now because so much of the activity that's occurring is people are saying, and I know you're all saying the same thing, where does what you're selling fit into my traditional HR linear career and HR processes, right? And in effect, it doesn't, right? Because what we're trying to do is to sort of move to a new way of working. And then if you were to ask me what I really think is going to happen in 2023, hopefully people are going to be asking this question, which is, if we really want to change the game, we need to make game-changing moves. And you can't do that by trying to, there's a great expression that Rashad Tabakawala uses, the future doesn't fit neatly into the containers of the past, right? So it's very hard to do some of the things we're doing if all we do is try to sort of squeeze them into the current talent and workforce and business operating models. So that's a big thing question to end with. That's a little bit about what we're thinking at I'm at Gloat and what I've been thinking about, and obviously would love to have some questions and discussion.
Hey, Jeff, as you go through it, first off, thank you for sharing. Always love your research roundups. But when you look at the clients from Gloat who are on the more progressive side, who have not only deployed their internal talent marketplace, but are challenging you in your product roadmap for where it needs to go down the road, what are the traits of the organization and of the leadership that is saying, okay, no, we're ready to find new tools to map the world?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Probably in the first few years, the company's about 7 years old. The first big clients that we had around in talent marketplaces when we were co-designing this in 2018, 2019, were companies like Unilever and Schneider Electric. And interestingly, the people who were sponsoring it and buying it were people in the innovation group or the talent innovation group. They weren't necessarily in an HR line group or even in a procurement group. So the early adopters, if you will, were really innovators who knew they needed to do some new things. Often these were people in the digital group, the digital transformation group, but not really in the HR group. And it was really a marriage or a connection between innovation groups and really the head of HR or a very senior person in HR, because they needed to create a budget for it. That nobody had a budget for a talent marketplace. We're beginning in 2022, we're seeing RFPs for talent marketplaces. We really did not see any RFPs for talent marketplaces before 2022. We saw recruitment RFPs, we saw skills development RFPs, we saw at people analytics RFPs, but we really did not see sort of talent marketplace RFPs. And I think now we are, which is why we're really focusing on, the business impact of this. And, for those of you who saw some of Gloat Live, to go back to it, the CHROs who were saying, look, I mean, this, we did this because for the business impact. And it changed our employee experience at the same time. So it's an interesting question: who's the buyer of technology that changes the game?
Yeah,
Which
I'm
sure
big
all of us
behavioral change.
are trying to figure this out.
Cool. People on the floor. Steve King, I see a hand up.
Yeah, Jeff, the merging of internal and external talent marketplaces makes perfect sense to me. But it's the how that I'm a little curious about. And since I'm not a talent marketplace person, I'd look at it but from the outside, it looks like that's both a big threat and an opportunity for them, that merger. So how does Gloat envision that merger happening? Does that make sense? Does the question make sense?
So say a little bit more about the question, so I respond to the pain point of the piece that you're most interested in.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, how do the external talent marketplaces fit into Gloat's view? You presented a view where you do both internal and external talent, meaning freelancers and others, and present that as kind of a unified interface to hiring managers, I assume. What's the role of the external marketplace in Gloat's view of that world?
Yeah, so again, this is a major piece that's on our roadmap for 2023. That's why I wanted to start the discussion with this group. It's interesting. I don't think the hiring manager is the person that we're aiming for here. Again, if I use the example of Novartis and their Marcus Graf, we interviewed him extensively in the Workforce Ecosystem book that we have coming out. Business managers are telling us that they would like to see the options for how to get work done that include deploying and redeploying and developing current employees and hiring new people and integrating any third-party talent platform that's out there, whether it's consulting, services, outsourcing, freelancers, crowds, etc. So that's really what we're aiming for. We're not aiming to make the hiring manager's job easier. The hiring manager job is a very specific job, which is to actually find full-time employees. But it's creating this sort of integrated view for people that are planning the work in their divisions for the next year or 2 or 3 as to how they get it done. So one other quick point. At Gloat, we've built from the beginning an incredibly open architecture. We're not like, we didn't build a closed garden and then open it up. We built an open garden and continued to connect to a lot of other things. So what we're trying to do is to extend the talent marketplace to include third-party platforms. Right. So it's not like we're not doing something different. So we're literally saying to somebody who's doing a project, if you want to do a project, you list that project. And then if there are a set of platforms that you're working with, people in those platforms can basically get into the market in the same way that internal employees could. And then, it's early days for it, but we know that I believe that's the direction we need to go.
Yeah, I guess I'm just asking if you're planning on being a competitor or a partner to the external marketplaces, or how that partnership would work. And you're saying you're going to be a partner. Is that fair? That was my direct question.
We're absolutely going to be a partner. And in fact, we're going to be a partner. And I'll give one other example. We created something called the Opportunity Hub in our platform already, because one of the ways that employees find opportunities in the organization is they do things like training or build out their experience. So we have a link with BetterUp. If you want to do coaching with a third-party coaching organization, we will bring that coaching organization in. If you want to bring in a university, you want to work with Guild Education or someone like that, Guild Education is integrated into the platform. It's not a separate platform. So these are all ways of extending the marketplace so that employees and managers have more access to opportunity and people. So it's very much a partnership strategy.
Cool.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
certainly, Doug, as we go through this, or Jeff, as you guys go through and are building roadmaps out, and as a community that kind of cares about raising the tide for all boats here, if there are architectural structures or guidance that you can offer platforms, we certainly welcome any input and feedback if it makes it easier for people to be part of the community as they're building out their approach and what they're doing with their platforms. Maxine, I see a hand up, so I'll turn it over to you quick before we wrap up.
Awesome. Thank you. Such a good presentation. So into everything that you're kind of working on. I'm a marketplace founder, and I want to ask, we're starting to build our marketplaces internal in enterprises as well. And what we're finding is by cataloging the employees on our marketplace, asking deeper questions, we're finding that certain companies don't know a lot of the value-added, passion-driven skills that employees have. For instance, we're doing this at Mitsubishi right now, and like one of their employees was one of the world's best saxophone players, and that wasn't in any of their internal documents, and they're not utilizing or capitalizing on those more personal skills. So my question is, in cataloging the employees, are you guys making room for employees to exercise these skills that aren't necessarily completely aligned with their corporate jobs? But we said, to make this employee happy, could he perform, at a beginning of a Christmas party or something? Could you have a stock record of these employees' passions that they could deliver internally in another way? Kind of like an internal knowledge or side hustle marketplace inside the company. Just wanted to know your thoughts on those inspirations, aspirations of the employees.
I think that's spot on. I think that's part of what we recognized very early on, is that people are not the job record that you have of them in your company and the previous jobs that they had that were relevant to getting hired by your company, which is the entirety of the information that we use for job and role development. I'm seeing you smile, Maxie. And so, we're not only going to look at we're going to ask you if you want to put in your LinkedIn profile, if you want to put in a personal resume. The other thing that we have found is, because a big part of talent markets is looking at projects. I'll give an example in 10 seconds. When we started developing videos at Gloat, we were about to hire people to do professional voiceovers. And then we posted on our internal marketplace. We were 120 people at this point. We said, does anybody have any interest or experience doing voiceovers? We had 120 people. We had 2 people who had done professional voiceovers, right? They, one was an engineer. I don't remember what the other woman was doing. And it was like, not only did they do it for us, but as you're pointing out, they were delighted to do it because this is one of their side hustles. This is what they want to do. So part of it is finding that and making it visible. And part of it is saying, here's the work that we need to do. We're doing a conference. We need music, right? Who are the musicians? We just don't ask that question right now.
I know. I love that. I hope that we do, because I think that will, that's the missing part.
but also, and I'll end with this, that's the reframing part. We're so used to putting things in these linear containers that the idea that our people have all these skills and interests and passions, as you're pointing out, that we can both access
Yeah.
to their benefit and to ours, I couldn't agree more. That's
Cool.
what makes it interesting. That's maybe, hopefully that's what we'll be talking about in 2023, Maxine. So we'll see.
Yes. Would love to follow up on that.
Fantastic. I know we've got more questions that are popping up around the place. We've hit kind of a time wall, so I want to respect everyone's time on that side of things. I know there was Link put some references into the chat earlier about the advocacy group and the great work going on there. We certainly encourage people to reach out who have questions, but just a note of appreciation for everyone being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Really great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you,
all.
Jeff.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
See ya.